Welcome to the next in our series of ADS office hours. I'm going to talk today about searching affiliations in the new ADS. It's complicated. It hasn't been done before now because of the complexity, and you'll find not very many publishers or other search or, indexes let you do it. The problem with the data, the affiliations are typically free-form. You might have phone numbers in their office numbers, mail stops, all sorts of things. In ADS, there are almost more than 34 million unique strings in all of our abstracts. And although it's fairly complete for the recent refereed journal, we don't have it for most of the early literature, we don't have it for conference proceedings, and you need to be able to communicate that to the user that what they're searching is not a full, guaranteed complete search. Authors have multiple affiliations. Sometimes they'll separate them nicely with a semicolon. Sometimes there's dashes, sometimes there's slashes, sometimes there's who knows what. And it becomes very difficult to interpret that correctly. And inherent ambiguity in abbreviations. In particular, the Institute of Astronomy could be in Cambridge, England, could be in Mexico, Tokyo, Moscow, Taiwan, Vienna, Bulgaria, or Leuven, I believe, is in Belgium. There's also Institute for Astronomy, is 5 or 6 of those in addition to these. So if somebody types IOA, you're not going to know what they're talking about. Again, I talked to reference this. If you're searching by affiliation, how do you convey to users that you're only searching a subset of the data because you don't know what you don't know. You don't have the information for conference proceedings. You're not going to be able to present that. You need to incorporate it nicely into your display. You need to make sure that it's linked together properly with authors, with their ORCID identifiers. So that all needs to get presented nicely. And librarians and scientists potentially have very different needs. Librarians typically want to know what's my output of my organization, where the scientists might say, you know, I really only want the John Smith that's at X, Y, or Z. And those are really different use cases. So we're trying to please everybody. What we have done so far is create a list of institutions and a canonical, we call it, a primary name that we're going to call that institution. For all institutions that we think do astronomy, we have done a 2-tiered effort. So we have broken it down into department level where we have that information, though again, we don't have that information everywhere. So there's a parent-child concept, which again adds to the complexity because you may or may not have that information and you don't want to exclude things. We've assigned the raw strings to these identifiers, very high percentage of them for astronomy, and we're still working on physics. And we've got a whole bunch of structure behind things to index it, to search it, to iterate and make the machine learning smarter. Just a little graph. We've got this big knowledge database with all these strings in it. We get an ID. Do we know what it is? Yes, we sign the ID. We're done. If we don't know what it is, we try to match it. You know, both just by string matching, by querying outside registries, by our own internal classification science, learning tool, or we hand curate. Eventually, the goal is to get all of these assigned and build them back into the knowledge database. The Curation Challenges is the huge potential for handwork. With 30% missing from physics out of 9 million abstracts, you're still talking about 3 million potential abstracts that we can't assign. So it has to be automated. You have to be able to bulk update and correct if you find that you've done an assignment incorrectly or you've split something that shouldn't be split. And it's computer intensive. Inconsistent naming, this grid identifier is sort of what the standard is at this point. There's been a lot of work by the groups that participate in ORCID are doing something called Research Organization Registry, ROR, and they've used that grid as a basis of it. But you can see that there's three different institutions, but they should be similar because they're state universities in Brazil. One is inverted in English, one is not in English. There's accents, so there's all sorts of tricks and pitfalls that you might run into. And we have lots of ambiguity. I talked about it Institute of Astronomy, even SAO, there's one in Moscow. The top one doesn't actually have a university. You can guess it's somewhere in Italy, but there's about 20 INFNs in Italy, so you don't really know where it is. We don't get the data from publishers. I think there are two publishers who give us this information as an identifier. So they just give us this nice raw string. Maybe they've cleaned up the raw string so that at least for a given institution, they're always giving you the same string, but not necessarily. So to turn all that into something usable takes a lot of effort. And then the different name changes, places merge, places split, places change names, places have abbreviations, places have foreign language equivalents. So you want to be able to do it well so that searching any of these different instances will give you the same results. This was just an example of a university in Hungary. Some of the pitfalls, this one has changed names. It used to be I think it used to be I don't know which came first. This JATE, Joseph Attila, and then the Technical University, I think is what it's JATE stands for. Now it's just the University of, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the city in Hungary where it is. You can see there's accented characters that are going to trip you up. Here's one that has, the fifth or sixth one down has and. There's two different departments at that university. Is the Department of Theoretical Physics and the Department of Experimental Physics two different departments? Looks like it. You're going to be, can you really do that fine-grained distinction or not? That's what you'll find out. So I, as an example, took Brian Schmidt. I reduced the year range so that I'd know to get only the one I was looking for, not the one that was 100 years ago. And as you can see, I pulled down on the left to select, so I could see that they're not all him. I'd want to exclude the BE. I'd want to exclude the BG. And then you can open up the affiliation facet on the left as well. Does this actually point to? So I happen to know that Brian is in Australia at Australian National University. So I open affiliations. There's the ANU. So that's going to help me reduce it. I've reduced it to refereed only. Again, that's going to help narrow things. But in fact, there's the fourth one down is not our Brian Schmidt. So what can I do to get rid of him? I can give it, I can select only the affiliations that are ANU. So that's a way to filter results you already have. Likewise, I could have just stuck AFF : for affiliation : ANU in the search bar, and it would have given me the same results. As I said, we've reduced it to 2 tiers for simplicity's sake. It's not the reality of the way that institutions are set up because there's many levels. And there's many levels that are at the same level, not necessarily a parent-child level. So for simplicity's sake, we've boiled it down into 2 tiers for now, whether we may extend it in the future. The CFA where we work here is a good example. It is a combination of the Harvard College Observatory, which is at Harvard University, and the Smithsonian Institution, whose parent is obviously Smithsonian. So if someone searches CFA, you want to get Harvard. If someone searches Harvard, you want to get CFA. If someone searches CFA, you don't want to get Harvard. So, in Smithsonian, you're going to want to split it into Air and Space Museum and CFA that are in different locations, 8 hours apart. You're going to want to be able to separate the two affiliations. Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley National Labs have a collaboration. Again, 2 layers. Is the Department of Physics at Berkeley the same as the physics division at LBNL? Probably not. But that requires a certain amount of expertise that not every user is going to have. NASA is also complicated. Here are all these various NASA centers: the Johnson Space Center, Ames, the Marshall Space Flight Center, JPL and IPAC, which are also Caltech children. Caltech has its own division of physics, astronomy, math, so it gets complicated. For our purposes, we took Goddard Space Flight out of the NASA child because it had its own complicated hierarchy. Goddard Space Flight has all of these projects that combine with University of Maryland and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that's University of Maryland College Park, et cetera. So it gets complicated very quickly. We introduced the concept of institutions. The difference of searching institutions and affiliations is basically the affiliations are a string search. If you search for Harvard in affiliations, you're going to get any string that has Harvard. So if somebody lives on Harvard Street in New Haven, you're going to find them even though you might not actually want to. Institutions are an index of what we have called the primary or the canonical version of an affiliation. So we have already done the work of amassing the different versions of your given institution into the institution. So for instance, I did institutional search on CFA. I got 35,000, but if I did an affiliation of CFA, I only got 3,800. That found only those affiliations that had the letters CFA in them together. And if somebody written Center for Astrophysics, that didn't include it. If someone had written 60 Garden Street, that didn't include it. You can get a little better if you do AF CFA or AF Harvard Smithsonian. That gets you up to 32,000. Again, it's apples and oranges. You're going to have trouble making those numbers identical, but you can see you're starting to get in the same range. So I thought, okay, let's do AF Harvard. Then let's try institution Harvard. AF Harvard, 79,000. Institution Harvard, 0. Oh, I remember the canonical version is Harvard U. So there's a learning curve. There's going to be autocomplete that will help. There's going to be a searchable list, and it's a 6,000 set, a set of identifiers. So it will take some learning curve, both as far as how the split is done for 2 tiers and how to best search your institution. But again, if I have a knowledge that CFA or Harvard Smithsonian is the way to search, somebody at another institution might not know that. So the hope is that by doing this institutional search, you're able to build in some of that knowledge that individual users might not have. Here's institution CFA, and I did year 2018, and then I put it down to referee papers. I was just actually going to compare it to 10 years ago to see what our research output was, just for grades. I went to the Explore menu, and I pulled it down and did a paper network. And this takes papers, it compares their reference list, finds things that have similar reference lists, and finds words in the title that are similar, and it groups them. So now you know that there's this block of papers that have to do with galaxies and that block that has to do with star formation. And I ran it for 10 years ago to compare just for grins to see what is going on. And there's other uses of this, but this is just an example of the kind of visualization and exploration you can do with the new ADS. We're still working, we're still splitting authors, we're still improving the user interface. We're going to have a hover over so that it works better. We'll need to get the autocomplete working well. The other piece of it that we haven't tackled yet is coupling a given institution with its author. So right now, if you search for John Smith, an affiliation, or Institute Harvard, you don't know for sure that Harvard and that John Smith and that Harvard, there could be a John Smith at Yale and another co-author at Harvard. So we're working, there's positional information that we can build in that complicates the search syntax, but is in place, so we just need to figure out a way to make the user interface a little more friendly so that people learn how to use it. And that is it about searching affiliations in ADS. I'd be happy to take questions on affiliations or other, either from the room or online. Let me know if you have questions. Yeah. Thank you.